Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start this evening, could I respectfully ask that you silence your cell phones so we don't have any interruptions while we're conducting our town hall forum. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Capital Improvement Plan Town Hall Forum. If you have not had the chance to look over the CIP, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen right now or go to westfargond.gov. Today we're going to give you a short presentation and then open up to questions and input from those in attendance, as well as any questions submitted online. Joining me as our Commissioner Brad Olson, whose primary portfolio covers street, water, and sewer, Assistant City Administrator and City Engineer Dustin Scott is with us here. And the purpose of this town hall is to give an overview of the Capital Improvement Plan, better referenced often by CIP. The process of creating that plan, why we use this type of plan, how projects make it onto the list of this plan, and how the plan will be funded. Following this public input session, the CIP will be sent back to the Commission to take action on adopting the CIP. Adoption of the CIP does not approve any individual project, but the long-term plan of work. We ask that you join us in taking this high-level consideration of the CIP today. Rather than focusing on any one project, we ask you to consider how the CIP lays out to a 5-year plan to maintain, improve, and grow our city. Once again, please feel free to scan that code and find the engineering page at westfargond.gov to take a look at the plan as we discuss it today. With that, I will turn it over to Assistant City Administrator, Mr. Dustin Scott.
Well, thank you, Commission President Dardis. So, getting into it here, you can follow along on the screens here. The overview of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, is a tool for planning long-term infrastructure and maintenance projects for the City of West Fargo. The CIP is a living document, and projects can be added or removed at any stage. Each project is presented before the City Commission multiple times and follows standard practices and policies for review and authorization. As has been mentioned, the adoption of the CIP does not approve any individual project, and the adoption of the CIP allows staff to begin the process of scoping and studying projects to provide additional information to the City Commission for consideration as the project moves through its approval process. So why the CIP? Well, CIPs are a standard practice for city governments to make long-term plans. The CIP provides guidance to staff and commission on long-term budget decisions and long-term project management. The graph shown here shows, this graph is showing how the capital budget over the next 5 years is distributed amongst types of projects. You can see that our highest area of spending are street projects, followed by building projects, which includes the new fire station. These numbers are constantly changing as we adjust to more accurate project costs through the life cycle of a project, and naturally as the volatility of the market changes. So how does a project get on the CIP? Well, the CIP is foremost focused on maintenance of existing infrastructure and then the addition of infrastructure as the city develops. It is important to note that when a new neighborhood is developed, the street and utility infrastructure is also included in the capital improvement plan. How is the CIP funded? The CIP follows the City Commission's guiding principles on financial policy that was adopted in 2021. The goal is to reduce special assessments for infrastructure. After applying a percentage of city funds, as shown in this chart, the remaining costs will be funded through other sources, such as outside funding, utility fees, and/or special assessments. The proposed CIP has been created to keep specials as low as possible while completing necessary projects and new development. Over the next 5 years, we are estimating about 28% of all of the project costs would be funded through special assessments. Now, this does not mean that each project is going to have a 28% special assessment or that all residents will be assessed at a 28% increase. It's, again, the collective total of all the projects over the next 5 years. We are estimating that, based on the information we have today, 28% of the funding for those projects would be funded with special assessments. The chart you see here shows where all the funding will come from for the capital improvements over the next 5 years. City staff work diligently to seek outside funding through grants, contributions from state and federal agencies, as well as local partners to cost share in those projects. How can residents stay informed? Residents can follow the life of a project through city commission meetings, as all projects will be presented multiple times before the commission at their regular scheduled public meetings, and agendas and meeting information are always available on our website. Specific project information is also available online by the time that a project is in its study or design phase. And then utilizing the project status to follow a project and be aware that a project is either not started, and if it's not started, we would have limited information at that time. And as you work yourself down this chart, you can see we go into starting with preliminary and/or scoping phase, into the study and design, then into construction until the project is complete. And as we progress that project through, more information becomes available and is disseminated either to the commission and/or the public. And again, we have, as projects mature, we have specific information available on the city's website. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Commission President Dardis for our question and answer session.
Before we do that, one of the things that was developed in the CIP by this sitting commission was to reduce the amount of dollars used in financing with special assessments. You'll note on one of the charts, the local reconstruction, we are now at 40%. That's the highest that we've ever been. And through historical information that we have of what our revenues are in all of our various areas of where the revenues are coming in, that's how we're planning to pay for many of these things. As Mr. Scott said, this is, at this point in time, it is a list. It's a list to prioritize what department heads have brought forward and what you from the public has brought forward. If you've called about a raised manhole cover or a sunken concrete around that, and we've had numerous complaints, those are the types of things that register with our department heads, whether it's engineering, planning and zoning, public works. And so that data is all accumulated. It's always kept in place, so to speak, as to how we might possibly address that. Last year, we did about a $3 million concrete improvement or street improvement plan, where we have identified throughout the year, both by resident complaints as well as staff, as to where we're going to do those concrete improvements. And so that's just one of many avenues that we have in determining how we're going to make this priority list. So with that being said, again, the approval of this CIP plan, when it comes before the commission, does not authorize a single project. It's authorizing the roadmap, the process of which has been used, and CIP plans have been used for years in the city of West Fargo, as well as across the state of North Dakota. It's the way cities do business. So with that, we're going to open it up to the public. This is a town hall meeting. I will also occasionally look to Miss Melissa Richard here. She is the Director of Communications. She'll be passing through the room with a microphone. We'd ask that you please speak into the microphone. And she is also monitoring as to whether or not we have any questions coming in online. This is the second meeting of 2 today. We had a substantial, large crowd at the 12 o'clock meeting, which we were happy to see. So with that, we're going to open it up for questions. Anyone that would like to speak, just please raise your hand and Melissa will come to you with the microphone.
Hi, my name is Dallas Carlson. I, of course, live in West Fargo. Couple questions. New developments, how does that come into play for the developer that's developing these new developments? Do they have any financial responsibility for any of this? If so, how much? Or is that all going to go back on the people that buy those lots, those houses? Second question is what new businesses and new, I guess new businesses on any type of tax breaks they get, how does that come into play in this whole program?
Thank you, sir. Great questions. Mr. Scott?
Yes, thanks for the questions. I'm going to start with the question on the developers and new developments. There are a few options for developers to work in West Fargo. We've had developments such as the Ranch at the Wilds that is down by 52nd Avenue South, where the developer financed all of those improvements, the sewer, water, and the streets, privately. There was no special assessments. There was no city participation in the financing of that neighborhood. Most commonly, a developer comes in and petitions to the city to create an assessment district to finance the sewer, water, and the streets. In that particular case, then the developer is they're paying things to plat and subdivide the land, but the infrastructure costs then would be financed through the special assessment if approved by the city commission. We do have a special assessment policy that was adopted in 2016, revised in 2021. When we do have a special assessment improvement, we follow our city policies, and then of course the state laws that are set forth in regard to financing that infrastructure. So I hope does that answer your question on the developer side? Okay.
If I can, there is some changes that we have made, and it's by each of the developments. So sometimes when the developers come in order for them to compete with other lots that are in a neighborhood, they will even put into some of the special assessment request street lighting, amenities, a fence, a border fence and things like that. And most recently, this commission has declined to finance those types of things because the burden is always placed on whoever's going to be buying that lot, and those special assessments are there. So that's a case-by-case basis, but there has been a couple of developments now where we would not allow the developer to put in all the amenities of a fancier lighting system or a border fencing and things like that they have to pay for that directly. Excuse me for interrupting.
And I believe the second part of the question was relating to tax incentives. I'd like to hand that over to our Finance Director, Jim Larson.
Thank you, Dustin. Actually, I appreciate the question because the tax incentives actually do not change the financing of these projects in regards to property tax. So if there's a tax incentive, it will not change these at all because we don't have any of the property tax or general fund money going into these projects. We're using mostly sales tax, assessments, grants, and other funding sources. So the real positive part is if there's a tax incentive where it's a business that generates retail that has sales tax, it'll actually generate additional funds towards these projects. So the tax incentives do not come into play in regards to directly financing these projects at all.
How are the special assessment areas or zones created?
That's the question of the hour. That's the tough one.
So the way the Century Code, the North Dakota Century Code is written is that each project is treated on its own merit, and at the beginning of that project, when we create a district, whether it's engineering staff working with and through the commission, a boundary is set to define the benefiting properties of that particular improvement or project that is moving forward. So on an individual project basis, at the very start, the city commission will establish that boundary based on the recommendation of staff. The next phase is to move forward with then the project and the design and construction. Once everything is complete, the final costs then are determined by the city commission, and then those costs are moved forward to a special assessment commission body that then decides on the allocation and the spreading of those costs to the properties within that particular boundary. But again, there isn't a citywide map where there's predetermined zones. Those zones or that boundary is created on each and individual project as they move forward.
And I can add that we
Commissioner
cannot-
Olson, please.
We cannot create a special assessment district that encompasses the entire city of West Fargo. The Century Code prohibits that. So if we were working on, say, 13th Avenue, we cannot create a assessment district that takes in the entire boundary of West Fargo and apply it to everybody. The Century Code won't let us do it.
When the analysis is done, the term that's used mostly is how does it benefit the neighborhood or the traffic patterns and the like. And that's as I said, Dallas, that's the difficult part, because we have situations where we only have two major arterials north and south, Cheyenne Street and 9th Street. And so some of the people that are in Charleswood, when 13th Avenue was being improved, then 9th Street was being improved at the corner there because of safety issues there. MetroCog and the North Dakota DOT had all had designated that as a high-risk intersection between 13th and 9th Street. So there were improvements made there in turning lanes and all of those types of things. So there were people that got caught in between that they may be midway through Charleswood and they got a 9th Street and they got a Cheyenne and they got a 13th. And that's what we absolutely want to try and avoid when we're doing the analytics of this. And we now have new and improved software where we can superimpose the various existing special assessment districts. And that will be give that much more scrutiny to make sure that we're not overburdening.
Because I'm a living example of that. I got caught between 32nd Avenue, 40th Avenue, and Cheyenne Street.
Yeah, and then there's Shadowwood development area that got caught in between Veterans Boulevard, 32nd Avenue, 40th Avenue, and Cheyenne Street. And one thing I'd like to add is what we have done in recent years is we've certainly tried to be consistent with either prior districts that were created or, again, previous policies. But like our Commission President Darda said, moving forward, we're developing some additional methods to help reduce the number of districts, if you will, and maybe getting into assigning an arterial corridor to a particular geographic boundary. We haven't set that by any means, but those have been some recent discussions that we've had that to try to alleviate that I guess that struggle of being caught between multiple arterial roads. Can we geographically divide our east-west and north-south roadways into, I guess, a predetermined boundary? But at this point, each project is taken forward on its individual merit and the boundary created based on that project's benefiting area.
Thank you for the question.
Hey, Robin Anderson. I just wanted to ask, is there any work, or do you guys work with any other entities while going through these projects? So, for instance, core area, are you working with Midcontinent or Excel to work on their timelines and how maybe you can work together and introduce some cost savings into projects for maybe burying electrical lines or other things like that? And then second question is, what happens to these projects if they are denied when they are brought up to the commission?
Thank you, Robin Anderson. So the first question, the utility coordination aspect, again, that kind of depends on the project. There, in previous years, we have held coordination meetings and invited all utility contractors to come in, take a look at our capital improvement plan, our list of projects for that particular year, and even in the years to come. As we've said over and over, that the challenge there is, really, since our projects are still a little bit volatile and can change and be pushed back any particular year, that does become a challenge for a Mid-Continent that is ready to go in the ground in 23, but then based on our process, we need to delay to 24. But the general answer to your question is yes, there is coordination with utility contractors, and especially before a project is going to get started. One of the first things that we're doing in our preliminary designs and as the project is being scoped, we reach out to the utility providers in that particular area that would be affected and certainly start coordinating whether or not they need to relocate their facilities or plan a joint project of some sort to utilize or to be efficient with the space. But it is a bit of a moving target, and as an example, last year, Xcel Energy, they had to move forward with a high-pressure line on 9th Street, and I can tell you that this particular year, we had slated to repair a bunch of concrete panels. And so, unfortunately, in back-to-back seasons, we're going to be disrupting traffic flow on 9th Street, and some of those things are just, we had a lot of conversations with Xcel. We asked them as best we could to hold off, but sometimes things just have to happen and they're not quite synced. Does that help? Does that answer your question there?
If you recall, last Monday night, we had a contractor come in, and they wanted to have a utility easement agreement with the city because they were going to share a trench, the excavation. So that's really not up to us because some of the utilities won't share excavation with anybody because of the nature of their product or whatever the case might be. But the city does not have an ordinance with regard to that. So if we had contractors coming forward, we would encourage that, absolutely, if they're compatible. Anyone else? A question?
There was a part two, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, there was a part two.
And I think I did that earlier today for Mr. Anderson, where I think he asked a two-part question and I left off the one part. So I hope I answered that here tonight. And now your second part, what happens when a project is denied? There's been very rare is a project denied, but it has happened. And it isn't always the sewer and water stuff. There's other larger scale projects that have been denied. But if a project is denied, it depends on the need or what that project is, I guess. It might kick back into the CIP. We'd probably take a look at moving it back in a year or two. If funding was the issue, we would react accordingly. If there's just a general, I can think of, a bike path project a few years ago that took some concern with the commission and on whether or not that was an appropriate way to spend sales tax dollars. And so at the end of we came back before the commission a few different times to continue discussions on that, and it did pass ultimately, but if that would have not passed, that would have been a particular project that was receiving state funding. The consequence there would have been a loss of funding, but we would have not moved forward with it. So ultimately, if a project is denied, it's either moved back into the CIP a year or two, or it's wiped clean. It would just depend on the nature of the project and why it wasn't approved.
There's another element that the public is welcome to observe, but normally they don't participate. And what we have is we have a pre-preview committee, which is staff members from police, fire, engineering, planning and zoning, public works, communications, all of those. So when a project's starting to move in through the process, those entities, those staff members, along with commissioners, in my case, I'm on that committee, and so they bring that forward then to a preview committee. This is a process that there's a number of larger cities in the state of North Dakota that do this. And then they get into the more intimate details. They're probably a little closer on what the funding mechanisms might be, what the costs might be, and what the benefit will be to a particular neighborhood. Going from when we rerouted the high pressure sewer when we crossed the interstate and things, that took a number of different meetings. We had third-party consultants in, all explaining the benefits of this, that if we have a major failure, what that means to our citizens, as to how many sewer backups and the like that we'd have in the community. So there is a review, pre-review contest and a review process that the public probably doesn't see, but that's how those projects move along. And that's one of the other mechanisms of how we prioritize what the need will be. Mr. Scott, earlier in the day, he referenced where we were going to have to make improvements on 5 to 7 lift stations. What we discovered is that the number was 5, but there was rehabilitation work that had to be made along the way, and some of these other manholes and the like, clean-out basins and things like force mains, excuse me. And it was amazing. They brought forward those photos, and anybody that would be looking at that would understand that needed to be done now, and we did that. And so those are the type of things. So when we talk about the CIP, it being a living document, it truly is, because until that we asked that contractor for some estimates and for some review of the condition. Once the photos were brought in, that elevated that project right away. So if one thinks that the CIP as it's printed out, or if it's as these 5 pages here for these 5 years, it's going to change drastically, potentially could change drastically on a moment's notice. But we have to have a plan of what we're going to do with the revenues that we can collect, how we can afford these things. Additional questions?
Hi, Robin Carlson. We moved here 4 years ago, and we absolutely love the city of West Fargo. We moved from Bismarck, and we're in the Preserve 7th edition. Great area. I'm just kind of curious. We pay extra money on our specials every year just to kind of stay ahead of them. And there's a large developer here in West Fargo that builds to rent out. And we happen to be in one of those neighborhoods. And I'm just curious if he is assessed the specials at the same rate we are, even though he's renting through another company.
Well, I'll try my best here. I appreciate the question. The special assessment process is going to look at the properties on their own merit as the land and how am I going to say this? So when we allocate an assessment, it is to the property, not necessarily to the ownership group and who owns the property, or what the intended use is of that property. So it could be, for example, a residential household that if it's on a 1 acre lot, that property is being assessed. If the project is being allocated on a square foot basis, then that property is being assessed its square footage cost, not necessarily because of who owns the property or whether or not it's a rental property. A special assessment is going to distribute the costs typically on a front foot or a square foot basis, sometimes on a unit basis, meaning if there's 50 households, we'll consider all 50 households one unit, and they would all basically pay a 50th of the cost. But again, my point is that we don't look at who owns it, who might own it 10 years from now. That ownership changes oftentimes, and so the special assessment process does not get into that detail.
Additional questions?
Commissioners, Chris Brungart, and thank you for having a public meeting. It's great to finally see some sunlight put on the process of the city. I actually have 4 questions. You ready, Dustin?
I'm ready.
Yeah, ready. Okay. Some of them they're kind of some of them are softballs. Do you have a minimum cost threshold that you include for projects?
Well, maybe so I can understand the question a little better. Do you mean in terms of how expensive a project would be to be put into the CIP, or?
Exactly. I mean, is it 25,000? Is it 500,000? How fine of a detail do you get to actually start accounting for the people's money?
So, and I tried to answer something similar at noon, and I'm going to try my best again. We don't have a threshold. A project could be as small as, I mean, I guess I can't recall of anything being less than 10,000, but we could have something being in the tens of thousands to something being in the tens of millions in the CIP. It's not necessarily a matter of the size of the project as is the type of project. So if it's using capital improvement sales tax, for example, and it's maybe just a small area of street that has to get repaired, if it's a $50,000 project, it could still be in the CIP. There are, of course, day-to-day maintenance type things that are not in the CIP, fixing potholes and so on. But so again, the specific answer is that at this point, we don't have a minimum or a maximum threshold to be in the CIP.
How are the projects prioritized?
I'll continue. Prioritizing is really, some of that happens through just collaboration between Public Works, engineering staff. But as Mayor Dardis mentioned, we also have a preview committee and a review committee. These are committees that are established to vet particular projects through, development applications, so on and so forth. And so really when we get into preparing a list of projects, we are doing that in a coordination effort between departments, and then at some point taking that either to the preview or review committees to further vet out. But again, the simple answer would be it's a coordination effort between staff and departments, and then taken to the city commission.
So there's no specific metric of impact to the community or cost or criticality of the service?
Well, I mean, again, not something in writing per se, but if engineering were to evaluate streets, for example, we have a ride quality index or a pavement index rating that we can look at to see how, what the shape of that particular street is in. We also have the ability to send cameras down sewer pipes, for example, and we can see the severity of damage. And again, staff would move forward with something that is in critical condition or deemed to be that high priority immediately to the city commission, and not necessarily wait to see what's on the list. So maybe to draw back to an earlier point made, these projects can move up and down on the list. And so there might be a project identified in 23, but if one of our sewer crews had been out and noticed that particular system is in a high priority today, we would take that project forward to the city commission. But as it comes to the priority within the CIP, there are things like grant funding that can affect the priority. There are certainly things like, and I would say that our sewer and water systems are our most critical need. Pavement projects, all of that stuff, again, just gets vetted through, and some of that includes that numeric process that you're referencing, And some of it is based on, again, staff recommendation to move forward. Some of that is we've applied for funding, so we're moving forward with projects that have received federal funding. But that's where there isn't just a hard, fast equation to apply, I guess, globally throughout our capital improvement plan.
Only two more questions for you.
Absolutely.
I promise. How do you plan to use public comment to affect the prioritization of the projects? You know, as an example, let's say the public really wants a new civic center or doesn't really like, I understand there's a need for core infrastructure to serve certain things. If you have a sewer that's breaking, you're going to fix the sewer. But how do you use, or how do you plan to use public input to help prioritize the level of your projects?
Well, so this part has been evolving recently, and in years past, we really just haven't had a lot of good outreach on the global CIP. And so what we have on the screen here, you can see that there is an online submission form. So at least we're starting with collecting public comment. Of course, citizens are welcome to attend commission meetings, but I think at this point what we would do is, as public comments or needs are brought forward, staff would vet those things out. If it's again, we had a recent one where someone's requesting additional lighting in their neighborhood. That particular neighborhood is a little older and doesn't have as much lighting as what would be in a new neighborhood. We would now take that and, again, vet some of those things out internally between Public Works, engineering, other staff, either get that into the CIP, or if it was determined to be of critical need, we'd bring that forward on its own to the City Commission to move forward with the project. But as a global process in general, I guess that's somewhat new territory for us to have. I guess if you're maybe suggesting, is there an opportunity for public vote on certain improvements, or?
I wouldn't say public vote. I think, have an iterative process where you collect, public input on an annual basis when you're developing the CIP, and have that public input to help vet projects that are of community importance and maybe raise or lower. I saw in the CIP you have a city hall on there. For me, I don't think a new city hall is a real high priority. Others might think there is. And maybe that's the type of public input you should start asking the community. I mean, it ties all the way back to the comprehensive plan and every other plan you're doing in there. So you have all these plans, start using that public input and utilize this as a resource. You're spending the people's money, you should ask the people's input. So.
Yeah, and that's, again, great point. And one of the things we're trying to make clear today is that we have not committed money yet. And as certain projects move forward, some of them are going to require a lot more public involvement. Again, if there's a water main break, that needs to get done, right? But yeah, when you're talking of a major facility, I would imagine there would be a lot of public engagement. But what we're trying to do with the capital improvement plan today is at least anticipate what may be coming forward so that we can have at least an understanding that the financial abilities are there if and when they do move forward. But as it relates to a potential new city hall or other larger scale things, I might defer to the two commissioners.
I'm not here to argue at City Hall right now when we're.
No, that's fine.
It's 5 years down the road. It's just a concept and a whole philosophy involving public. I truly think the best government we have is one that people are involved and encouraged. That's the biggest word, encouraged to be involved.
Absolutely.
And that's
These meetings on the CIP is a direct result of public input.
Yes, they
The
are.
fact that they wanted to understand how we how we develop the priority list, how something makes the list and something else doesn't. So these two meetings today are a direct result of that. The commissioners said, we want this type of thing. And, several weeks ago, we had the same meeting in this very room where we had the school district with us along with the library. And we had some conversations about the possibility of the next venture that we do, regardless of what the dynamic of that venture might be, that we might be able to get efficiencies because we include something that's from the library or from the school district, and or the expansion of City Hall. There's been conversations that have been ongoing that we're not quite ready for we're looking at some legalities as to what we can do and what would be right, but that'll be coming forward to the public. Those will be ample opportunities. With regard to a major building structure like City Hall that you referenced, Mr. Brungart, that question was raised earlier in the day. And from this commissioner's perspective, I can't imagine that we would not go to the public for their approval on that, rather than,
It all depends upon the funding sources.
Yeah,
And
if-
where we would
you know,
come
if-
up with that, whether we need a vote from the public or not. And we'll make every opportunity available to the public to hear their concerns or, approval or disapproval.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm not here to talk City Hall. I just use that example. So if I sidetracked, I appreciate your comments and your efforts to increase public participation is greatly appreciated. I got one last question, and I'll hand this off. Okay? Good. The last question is, as alluded to a couple times before, is this plan fiscally constrained? That's the question. And how do you fiscally constrain it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is this project fiscally constrained, this plan fiscally constrained, and how do you fiscally constrain it? You identify all your sources of taxes and grants and all that, and do you aggregate the entire cost at the end and then just make up the difference in specials, or how do you go about the process of fiscally constraining your plan?
No, no, we don't. Yes, it is. We will not overspend our ability to deal with the situation at hand. Again, last Monday night was a milestone for the city of West Fargo again. Our bond rating went up substantially. Our bond rating went up because of the great work like Mr. Larson in our finance department, where we were paying off bonds early. When we were elected, Brad and I, we had, per capita, we were only even, if you will, with Williston, North Dakota, that had the Bakken. That's the type of growth that we've experienced here in West Fargo. So the projects, in order to provide services for the public, the streets and all of the things that we had to do, and the improvements and the development of water and sewer and all of that type of thing. Per capita, we were equal to Williston, North Dakota. But we're not in the Bakken. We're not in one of the 5 producing oil counties, so we weren't getting all of those additional dollars. So what we've done here is we've continued to spend down. Jim, what did we satisfy bonds for recently? 320 million?
We're about 320 million right now.
320 million that we paid off early. So, I understand the public's concern of what we're doing here and what this CIP looks like, and there's a new city hall 5 years down the road in 2026 or 2025. But the reality of it is that the heavy lifting has been going on for a while now, and that we're paying off this debt so we can get these bonds. And so our bond rating is now AA1,
AA3.
AA3. So that's good news, because every time that we do have to fund another project, our interest rates will be lower because our ability to pay our bills are second to none. And that's taken a lot of hard work. And that's not some of the things that maybe the public is as concerned about. You get your tax statement or you get your special assessment. So we need to be better at explaining some of the things that we are doing, that we are to take down the debt that the city had to incur during our peak growth area. So this public input is paramount to me. I just wish we could be more responsive sometimes to you that are asking the questions. That's the one thing I hope that you take away from us, is that we need to be better at responding to you, because you're our boss. You're all of our bosses, all the staff people in here and your commissioners. And we need to be responsible to that. Let's go, any additional questions from the, I'm sorry, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, President Dardis. The question was, is it fiscally constrained? It is not. One of the critical components of this project is to make sure that we don't constrain ourselves, in essence. An example is the fire hall. We're only borrowing $10 million on it. We actually have the capacity to pay cash for the whole thing. But if we do, funds that we need in 2 or 3 years will not be available because we paid cash out today. The access of the type of bonding we can get to for this project is available, so we can use it. That planning is critical so we don't have to push our special assessments higher than we've committed to. So our constraints have been set by our commission on what we assess, but we're trying to make sure that our financial plan to hit these projects work and not have us to force, unfortunate decisions like increasing assessments beyond the guidelines. So from my perspective as a finance director, it's critical we have this plan so we spend our money accordingly. It's like if you're going to buy a car next year, but you spend your entire savings, then what do you got to do? You got to borrow. Well, this allows us to actually cash flow things properly and maximize how we're going. And that's part of how we moved our rating up, is by positive financial planning forward. And that rating, what does that do? That allows us to pay less interest, have lower interest rates, which we can pass on to the homeowners for the specials we do have to assess. Also, the amount that we need for our general fund operations are less for those projects that are bonded through general funding. So we find it positive, and so, but if we fiscally constrain ourselves, we might not be able to make that constraint later. So we use it for a planning document instead of constraining us. Hopefully that helps in understanding why the critical component from my perspective.
Brad Schmidt, West Fargo. Brad, I have a couple questions for you regarding the comment you made about whether or not you would seek public input on a large capital project. Can you give me one good reason, regardless of funding? I mean, you said depending on where you get funds for like a building project, I can't imagine any place you would get funding that would be not involving taxpayer dollars of some kind from us. When you have a project like the city is talking about, $15 or $17 million for a new city hall, can you give me one good reason why you would not want to ask the citizens if they would want to invest that much in that kind of a building project?
As far as a public-wide vote, is that what your question is?
Yes. School districts do it all the time, as I talked to you about at noon. I'm curious. I mean, the mayor said he would definitely do that. We're citizens, and if we didn't want to have $15 million city hall, wouldn't you want to know that? Would you want to make that decision as 5 people?
We would hear that through the public forums that we're having right now, so then we could make the decision as the elected officials. School districts operate under a totally different concept than what we do as far as building projects and things like that.
So
And
other
so
than
do,
that,
like,
other than
libraries.
that you can do it, that you don't have to, give me one good reason why you would not want to have a public vote for something like that on a $15 million, $17 million city hall.
I guess
And you
I
can
can't-
think about that and let me know later. Second question, you stated with some confidence that North Dakota Century Code prohibits a citywide assessment for certain things. Can you give me that section of the Century Code, please? And if
No,
you
I
don't
don't
know it right
know it.
now, could you send that to me, please?
I don't have that.
I have it in my pickup, Mr. Schmidt.
Okay, can you send that to me, Bernie?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Third question, this is for Jim Larson. Has the city ever transferred, within the last 5 years, has the city ever transferred any funds out of our municipal utility fund into the general fund? And if so, do you know about how much that would be?
I'm not prepared to answer that in full amount, because I've not researched it. I'm not aware of transfers from the utility fund over.
None at all.
I will not attest to that either way, because I've not had a chance to research that.
Could you check that and let me know via email?
You can put a request in for that, yes.
I will do that, sir. Thank you.
Additional questions?
Craig Griesbach, Brooks Harbor area in West Fargo. I guess I just have a comment. I'm a highway contractor in North Dakota, and I can just say, work on the timing of these projects. I know myself and a lot of my competitors were already full, and our costs are at the highest level they've ever been. I know for pipe and everything, we're paying more than we ever have before, and the availability is tough to get. So I just check with what's going on in the state and other projects around us. I know the North Dakota DOT, they're having their largest infrastructure package since Dwight Eisenhower for the next 4 years. So the availability of contractors, I know I went from bidding against 20 other contractors to maybe having 2 or 3 contractors on the job. So timing is paramount, and as early in the spring as possible.
Thank you for your comments. When we recently opened our bids for the new fire hall, there were many of the contractors that had a notation on the bottom of the bid that this bid is good for 7 days. This bid that was mostly steel contractors. At the initial bid, we had no bids for masonry because there had been projects that had been bid out ahead of us, the Kindred Schools and the Rocking Horse New Elementary School for the city for the West Fargo Public Schools. So the volatility of that and the availability because of the workforce shortages that we're experiencing is absolutely a truism, and I appreciate you bringing that up. But it's very sobering when you're opening these bids and you're looking at what we consider a really prime project in the community, and they're telling you that your bid is good for 7 days, and you better sign it, or else it's going to go up exponentially 3, 5, 7, 10%, whatever the case might be. And we had that on a number of the bids that we received on the fire department. So you've got to be, that goes back to some of the comments maybe that Mr. Brungart was doing, is questioning about, prioritizing and stuff like this. This is a difficult time to be having capital improvement projects and/or the type of maintenance and service that we have to do through the community, because even when you come to road contractors, I've been told, the price of asphalt right now is finally about even with concrete about a year ago, and now concrete is very difficult to get. When the diversion continues to start its projects in the spring, there's going to be a lot of concrete poured, and as this gentleman said, the projects that are out there from the North Dakota DOT, because of the federal government and some of the funding that they've done, it's going to be interesting. Just alone in the city of Fargo, there's $32 million worth of construction that needs to be done on their levees to finish their flood programs. I don't know where they're going to get the contractors to do that. And that's all tied into the major diversion project. So it's an interesting time for sure when you're dealing with contractors and subcontractors when you're asking for their services. They don't have the capacity. Additional questions, please. Melissa, would you check to see if there's any questions online, please? Thank you. You good?
I'm good.
We don't have any online, but I will repeat the ones that were submitted earlier. We talked about them at the noon session, but I'll repeat them. There was one that was submitted earlier about additional lighting in the neighborhood around Westside Elementary. I'll let Dustin, if you want to touch on that and what your team is doing.
If you would, Dustin, go through the process. That's an existing neighborhood. Great people over in Westside. Okay, and it's an existing neighborhood. When a resident has brought forward that they don't think that there's adequate lighting, how would the whole process work from start to finish, if you would, and how you would determine how you would fund it and pay for that?
Sure. what I want to start by referencing is we do have a process on our website today for traffic calming. Because again, traffic calming is a common one that comes out of a neighborhood, a request for either a speed bump, speed table, whatever have you to, yep, stop signs, anything that small to roundabouts. We engaged the MetroCog agency, or MetroCog is a transportation entity, and they did a global study and helped facilitate a process by which we can deal with specific requests from the public. Again, Mr. Brungard asked about public engagement. That was an open process to the public. It's that type of public engagement that does then facilitate and lead into projects into the CIP. But so I do want to, again, just throw the plug out there that for traffic calming situations, that is a very specific process that is outlined in our website, and it is very similar to what we will do now with this particular request for street lighting. It'll start by, again, at some level, staff has to start. That's what we're here to do, that's what we're paid to do, is go evaluate that particular request. We'll probably compare the actual lighting out there. We'll measure the lumens, compare it to industry standards that are available. If things check out and staff feels that it's necessary to move forward with, again, at some point it will we'll dive into further engineering if needed, or we might stop at that point and ask the city commission to approve a project moving forward. And in that case, we would probably at that, engage the neighborhood. But at the end of the day, again, staff is going to evaluate whether or not something is critical and make a recommendation to the city commission, especially when it comes to health and safety concerns, and lighting would probably fall in that category. When it comes to amenities, so things like, can we get a roundabout, that might come with a different approach and process. But when it comes to health and safety, staff is going to make a recommendation to the city commission. We're going to compare it to other similar projects that are in the CIP. In terms of funding, we're going to look at the guiding principles that are in this particular document. We're going to look at if it's a local reconstruction, applying 40% sales tax. If it is at all eligible for grant funding, we'll certainly pursue that. There'll be, again, those discussions, though, will take place as the project matures and with the city commission. But first and foremost, it starts with staff evaluating those requests and making a recommendation to the preview and review committees that Mayor Dardis has touched on, and then ultimately go before the city commission before they would move forward.
Often in neighborhoods, whether it's, the condition of the street or, this lighting issue, there'll be one or two residents that have maybe visited over the fence or in the driveway that they think it's inadequate. But when, by gathering public input, then you get the feel of the neighborhood, because if they're going to be assessed of, some of this expense, that changes things dramatically. So that's the point I wanted to make here, is that we have to always stay engaged and get a feel and a pulse, if you will, from what the neighborhood truly thinks about the project. There's some people that feel very strongly about this or that, and they can sway a commission in a sense of raising the question to the staffing, because if Brad gets 4 or 5 emails on a particular issue, and I get 4 or 5, and Mandy George gets 5, and Eric Jerdevig and Mark Simmons, all of a sudden, all of us are asking questions regarding this issue to staff. They're going to take that as we need to really, take a look at this and possibly move this forward. So the politics of it, unfortunately, gets involved too sometimes. But, you all have to understand, as we also fall back on the expertise of the great people that have the experience and the education of how to deal with this. Then we have to make the decisions with regard to the finances.
It could come be, and with this lighting example, it could be just simply changing out the light.
Could be retrofitting too, yeah, and that's the point I was gonna say also, is good point, Commissioner Olson, is that it could be retrofitting with all the developments of LEDs and how things work and the voltages and the thing that you can do, and we have the right people in the right places that can do that evaluation. Additional question, Ms.?
Yes. How do we decide which potholes or roads are repaired each year?
Well, that one I'll probably turn over to our Public Works Director, Matt Anvik. But I'd lead off by, as he turns his microphone, I'll lead off by just saying again, there are some of the routine maintenance projects that are not included in the capital improvement plan. So things like pothole repair are not included in the CIP, but I'll let our Public Works Director comment on that further.
That's a good question. A lot of it is our street foreman. He drives pretty much all the roads all the time, and our different crews are out there. If they see something that's really bad, our sanitation guys will say something. A lot of times we will get feedback from either the commissioners or the public in general, and we get a bunch, the calls in through the website or submissions from the public saying, okay, there's these potholes that are big enough to, have a small dog in them, and we got to go out there and fix them. Those are the ones we kind of prioritize by that. Usually Dan, our street foreman, has a pretty good idea of which ones are really bad. Like Center Street this year really popped over the winter. We went out there before one of these last snowfalls and got quite a few of them done. Then it snowed, and then we pretty much had to go right back and redo them again because a bunch more popped again. But that can change from, year to year, fall to the spring. Last fall, he was going around looking at him and Andrew, our traffic engineer, went around and looked at a bunch of different panels for the concrete, and they thought they had a pretty good handle on what we were going to do. That was probably only maybe $200,000-$300,000. Went back and looked at it again this spring, and probably another 10 panels had popped that we needed to put on that project again. So that just inflated it over, one winter, just because of the volatility of our weather that we have here. So really, it's prioritized by what we are, are seeing with our guys on the ground driving the streets, and then requests from commissioners and the public in general.
Thank you. Any
And
additional?
the last question was in regards to the use of special assessments and for the projects, which we heard tonight, and I think it might be helpful as just a suggestion to go back to the chart where you have the percentages lined out, and maybe Dustin and Commission President Dardis and Commissioner Olson, you could just give some context for where we were 4 years ago in terms of whether or not we had those types of percentages broken out to be assigned to projects, and the difference between 4 years ago and where we are today, and how you've kind of moved our guiding principles forward for those funding, so the public kind of can see the progress that we've made on that.
I might have to refer to Mr. Larson. We've never been at 40%, and that's something, quite honestly, we're proud of. I know that doesn't ease when you're looking at maybe your tax bills or your special assessments. We understand that, but it's better than we've ever been before. And that's a commitment that we've made that we're going to live up to. If we can't afford it, then we can't afford it. But Jim, there were times where well over 50% were special assessed. And we're trying to hold the line at 28%.
Actually, our city engineer and assistant city administrator can answer it better.
Yeah, I suppose being as I've been around probably longer, or certainly longer than Jim, historically, and maybe specific to the question, 4 years and longer ago, the only funding principle that we really applied was, on an arterial project, we had a general direction from the commission to fund $1 million per mile out of capital improvement sales tax. The rest of it was either through federal or state grants and special assessments. So this is really the first time, this was a part of the CIP that was adopted in 2020, these particular thresholds. And I do want to iterate that these are a starting point and more of a, to develop the CIP, we start here, but again, each project is brought forward on its own merit to the City Commission. Things like the downtown Cheyenne Street project, the City Commission decided to put $1.5 million of economic development sales tax funding, along with the $2.5 million or $2.7 million grant that we got. And then also, for the first time that I've ever seen in my near 15 years here, put a cap on the amount of special assessments that were going to be used to finance that project. So out of what was brought forward to the commission was an estimated project of $10.4 million. The City Commission put a cap of $1.8 something million of special assessments. So that rest of that project is a combination of funding and city, or a combination of outside funding and city funding. But again, really 2020 was the first time we implemented these starting basis parameters. And I, again, will refer back to the guiding principles that were adopted in 2021 last year. The goal, as directed by the City Commission, is to always focus on reducing special assessments. And so, again, it's been a pretty significant change in the last 4 years.
Mr. Scott's example of downtown Cheyenne Street is an excellent one. We had public meetings where we introduced what was going to transpire down there, the drawings of how the parking was going to be, and the bump outs and all of those types of things. And we had an estimated cost on that. Then it came to light that there was water and sewer that needed to be replaced. And when those additional costs were brought forward, the commission absolutely wouldn't budge, because we had already told those neighborhoods in that assessed area what that assessment was going to be. We gave our word that that's how we were going to do it. And I believe if you take a look at the different funding sources, we use 6 or 7 different funding sources in order to pay for the 10.4 million. But never did we ever deviate from what we told the public we were going to special assess them. And that's important, that's why you're here tonight. Those are the type of assurances that you need to hear, that you're concerned about how we're spending your tax dollars. Well, your concerns are my concerns, and Brad's concerns, and all of the members of the commission. It might not appear that way sometimes with the way that we conduct our business, but there are many things that go on behind the scenes that help guide us on how we get to those points. So continue to reach out to us and to the city and ask those questions. We asked for this job. You have a right to ask us how we come to our conclusions. I'd ask you never to tell me how to vote, but you could certainly guide me with information and the like, whatever. Are there any additional questions from anyone? We don't have any more online. I can't express properly how delighted I am that you joined us this evening to share your comments. Thank you. With that, we'll end the Talden Hall meeting. Thank you for coming.